In the spring of 2015, 4 college students from Sacramento State University embarked on what was meant to be a simple weekend camping trip to the ancient groves of Humboldt Redwoods State Park. Derek Lawson, 23, Ryan Murphy, 22, Ashley Torres, 21, and Nicole Webb, 24, were close friends who had been planning this getaway for months as a celebration before final exams. The group was experienced with basic outdoor activities, though none were serious wilderness experts. They intended to spend 2 nights camping in designated areas and exploring some of the park's more accessible trails before returning to campus on Sunday evening to resume their studies. The plan was straightforward and well within their capabilities. They would drive Derek's pickup truck to the Avenue of the Giants area, set up camp at one of the established campgrounds, and spend their time hiking the marked trails and photographing the massive trees. It was meant to be a relaxing weekend away from textbooks and lecture halls, a chance to decompress in one of California's most beautiful natural settings. The group had reserved a campsite and informed their families of their itinerary. Everything about the trip appeared routine and safe. On Friday afternoon, May 15th, the 4 friends loaded Derek's truck with their camping gear and departed Sacramento around 2 p.m. They made the familiar drive north through California's Central Valley and into the Redwood region, a journey they estimated would take approximately 4 hours. The mood was celebratory as they looked forward to their weekend in the ancient forest. Cell phone records later confirmed they made several calls during the drive, checking in with family members and posting photos on social media as they traveled through small towns along the route. They arrived at Humboldt Redwoods State Park in the early evening and checked into their reserved campsite. The park ranger who processed their registration later recalled the group as friendly and well-prepared. They had proper camping equipment and seemed knowledgeable about basic park rules and fire safety. After setting up their tents, they spent the evening around their campfire, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the towering forest. Other campers in nearby sites reported hearing normal conversations and laughter from their camp throughout the evening. Saturday morning began without incident. The group was seen by other campers preparing breakfast and organizing their day packs for hiking. According to the park's visitor logs, they indicated their intention to explore several of the established trail systems, including portions of the Founders Grove Nature Loop and some connecting trails that would give them access to more secluded areas of the park. These were well-marked trails that thousands of visitors used safely each year. The group appeared confident and prepared as they set out around 10 a.m. The first sign of trouble came Saturday evening when the group failed to return to their campsite by nightfall. Other campers in the area noticed their tents remained empty and their trucks sat unused in the parking area. Initially, this wasn't cause for immediate alarm. It was possible they had decided to extend their hike or were taking their time enjoying the scenery. However, as the evening progressed and the forest grew dark, their continued absence became more concerning. By Sunday morning, when the group had failed to return overnight, fellow campers alerted the park rangers. An initial assessment of their campsite revealed that their sleeping bags and most of their food remained untouched, suggesting they had not returned at any point during the night. Their day packs were missing, along with water bottles and the camera Derek had brought to photograph the giant trees. The absence of these items indicated they were still somewhere in the park, presumably on the trail system. Park rangers immediately initiated search protocols. They began by checking the most obvious locations along the established trail routes the group had indicated they planned to explore. The Founders Grove area was thoroughly searched, as were the connecting trails that led to other groves within the park. Rangers called out for the missing students and checked for any obvious signs of their passage, but the well-traveled nature of these trails made identifying specific footprints or evidence extremely difficult. As Sunday afternoon progressed without any trace of the 4 students, the search was elevated to a full missing persons investigation. The Humboldt County Sheriff's Department was notified, and additional search and rescue resources were mobilized. The families of all 4 students were contacted and informed of the situation. The news was devastating to parents who had expected their children to return to Sacramento that evening to prepare for their upcoming finals. Derek's parents, Michael and Linda Lawson, immediately drove to the park from Sacramento. They arrived late Sunday evening as search operations were being suspended for the night due to darkness. Linda Lawson later described the surreal experience of seeing her son's truck sitting untouched in the parking area while wondering where he could possibly be in the vast forest surrounding them. The family provided investigators with details about Derek's personality and outdoor experience, emphasizing that he was responsible and safety-conscious, making his disappearance even more puzzling. Ryan Murphy's family provided similar character references, describing him as level-headed and reliable. His father, Tom Murphy, emphasized that Ryan always stayed in touch during trips and would never simply disappear without explanation. Ashley Torres' parents, who had immigrated from Mexico when Ashley was young, were devastated by the news. They described their daughter as cautious and studious, someone who would never take unnecessary risks. Nicole Webb's family painted a picture of a mature, responsible young woman who was pursuing a degree in environmental science and had a deep respect for nature and outdoor safety. The search resumed at dawn on Monday with significantly expanded resources. Professional search and rescue teams from multiple counties converged on the park, bringing specialized equipment and trained search dogs. The challenging terrain of the redwood forest presented immediate obstacles. The dense canopy created a perpetual twilight even during daylight hours, making visibility limited. The forest floor was covered with decades of accumulated debris, fallen branches, and thick undergrowth that could easily conceal signs of passage or struggle. Search teams began systematic grid searches of the areas surrounding the established trails. The working theory was that the group had somehow become lost or disoriented while hiking and had wandered off the marked paths. In dense forest environments, it was possible to become confused about direction even when staying relatively close to established routes. The searchers called out constantly, hoping the missing students might hear their voices and respond if they were injured or trapped somewhere in the vicinity. The search dogs were deployed along the trail routes the group had planned to explore. The canines were able to pick up scent trails that indicated the 4 students had indeed followed their intended path initially. The scent trails led along the established routes for several miles before becoming confused and difficult to follow in areas where the undergrowth was particularly dense. This suggested the group had started their hike as planned but had somehow deviated from the marked trails at some point during their journey. As the search continued through Monday and into Tuesday, the scope expanded beyond the immediate area around the established trails. Search teams began exploring more remote sections of the park, including areas that were typically off-limits to casual hikers. Helicopters were brought in to conduct aerial searches, though the dense canopy significantly limited their effectiveness. The massive trees that made the park so spectacular also made it nearly impossible to spot anything on the forest floor from above. The investigation took on additional urgency as investigators realized they were dealing with 4 missing persons rather than a simple case of hikers who had lost their way. The fact that all 4 students had disappeared together suggested either a serious accident that had befallen the entire group or some other circumstance that had prevented them from returning to their campsite or seeking help. The remote location and the challenging communication conditions in the deep forest added layers of complexity to both the search efforts and the investigation. By Tuesday evening, the search had covered hundreds of acres of forest terrain without yielding any trace of the missing students. No discarded equipment, no signs of struggle, no evidence of their passage beyond the initial scent trails that had dissipated in the dense undergrowth. The 4 friends had seemingly vanished into the ancient forest as completely as if they had never existed. The investigation was about to enter a prolonged phase that would test the resources and determination of everyone involved in the effort to bring the students home. The search for Derek Lawson, Ryan Murphy, Ashley Torres, and Nicole Webb entered its 3rd day with a massive coordinated effort involving over 100 personnel from multiple agencies. The Humboldt County Sheriff's Department had taken command of the operation, working alongside park rangers, volunteer search and rescue teams, and specialized tracking units. The scale of the response reflected both the seriousness of the situation and the challenging nature of the terrain they were confronting. Wednesday morning brought new strategies as searchers attempted to think beyond the conventional approaches that had yielded no results. Teams began exploring the possibility that the students had encountered some kind of emergency that forced them to seek shelter or assistance in unexpected directions. They expanded their search grid to include areas that were not connected to the established trail system, considering the possibility that the group had become disoriented and headed toward what they believed might be civilization or help. The search dogs continued to play a crucial role, though their effectiveness was limited by the age of the scent trails and the complex forest environment. On Wednesday afternoon, one of the tracking teams reported a promising lead when their dogs seemed to pick up a stronger scent concentration in an area approximately 3 miles from the last confirmed location on the established trail. The area was characterized by extremely dense undergrowth and steep terrain that would have been challenging for inexperienced hikers to navigate. Search teams converged on this location and began an intensive examination of the area. They found what appeared to be broken branches and disturbed vegetation that could have indicated the passage of people through the thick brush. However, the evidence was inconclusive. The forest was home to various wildlife, and determining whether the disturbances were caused by humans or animals proved difficult. Despite hours of careful searching in the immediate vicinity, no definitive proof of the students' presence was discovered. Thursday brought the first significant piece of physical evidence. A search team working in a remote canyon area discovered a water bottle partially buried under fallen leaves and forest debris. The bottle was identified by Derek's parents as matching the brand and style that Derek typically carried on outdoor excursions. The discovery generated immediate excitement and hope among the searchers and families, suggesting they might finally be closing in on the missing group's location. The area around the water bottle discovery was thoroughly processed as a potential crime scene. Investigators photographed the location from multiple angles and carefully documented the position of the bottle and the surrounding terrain. The bottle itself was sent for fingerprint analysis and any other forensic evidence that might provide clues about how it came to be in that location. Soil samples were taken from the immediate area, and search teams expanded their grid pattern around the discovery site. The location of the water bottle was particularly puzzling to investigators familiar with the park's geography. The canyon where it was found was not accessible from any of the established trails without significant off-trail hiking through extremely difficult terrain. For the students to have reached that location, they would have had to deliberately leave the marked paths and navigate through dense forest for several miles. This suggested either that they had become seriously lost and disoriented or that some other factor had led them to that remote area. Despite the intensive search around the water bottle location, no additional evidence was discovered. The search teams expanded their efforts to include all accessible areas of the canyon and the surrounding ridges. They rappelled into steep areas that would have been impossible to reach on foot and used specialized equipment to search dense thickets where a person might become trapped or concealed. The challenging terrain made progress slow and dangerous for the searchers themselves. By Friday, exactly 1 week after the students were first reported missing, the search operation was facing practical limitations. The massive deployment of resources was unsustainable over an extended period, and the lack of additional discoveries was creating pressure to reassess the approach. Weather conditions were also beginning to deteriorate, with forecasters predicting several days of heavy rain that would make search operations both more difficult and more dangerous. The families of the missing students gathered for a meeting with law enforcement officials to discuss the status of the search and the plans moving forward. The meeting was emotionally charged, with parents demanding that the search continue at full intensity regardless of the cost or difficulty. Linda Lawson spoke passionately about her son's character and survival skills, insisting that he and his friends were still alive somewhere in the forest waiting for rescue. Tom Murphy echoed these sentiments, arguing that 1 week was not sufficient time to conclude that hope was lost. Ashley Torres's parents, Maria and Carlos Torres, struggled with the language barrier as they attempted to communicate their desperation through a translator. They had taken time off from their jobs and driven from Sacramento to be present for the search, but felt helpless and frustrated by their inability to directly participate in the efforts to find their daughter. Nicole Webb's mother, Patricia Webb, had been maintaining a constant presence at the search command center, refusing to leave until her daughter was found. The sheriff explained the reality of the situation with compassion but honesty. The park encompassed thousands of acres of extremely challenging terrain. The search teams had covered the most logical areas based on the students' known plans and the limited evidence discovered. Weather conditions were deteriorating, and continuing the massive search operation posed risks to the searchers themselves. However, he assured the families that the case would remain active and that smaller, more targeted search efforts would continue. If you're finding this story as gripping as we are, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any updates on this mysterious case that's about to take an even darker turn. The decision was made to scale back the active search to a smaller, more sustainable operation while keeping the case file open as a missing persons investigation. A core team of experienced search and rescue personnel would continue working in the area, following up on any new leads or information that might emerge. The families were encouraged to return home while staying in close contact with investigators about any developments. The transition from active search to investigation marked a painful milestone for everyone involved. The families reluctantly returned to Sacramento, faced with the impossible task of resuming their normal lives while their loved ones remained missing. Derek's truck was impounded as evidence and thoroughly processed for any clues that might have been overlooked. The camping equipment left at their campsite was also collected and analyzed, though it yielded no additional insights into what had happened to the four friends. In the weeks following the scaled-back search, investigators pursued various theories about the students' disappearance. They interviewed other campers who had been in the park that weekend, looking for anyone who might have seen or interacted with the missing group. They reviewed park entrance and exit logs to determine if any suspicious vehicles or individuals had been present during the relevant time period. All of these efforts produced no meaningful leads. The possibility of foul play was thoroughly investigated. Background checks were conducted on park employees and known individuals in the area with criminal histories. The students' personal lives were examined for any indication of conflicts, debts, or relationships that might have created risk. Social media accounts were analyzed for any signs of planning beyond their stated camping trip or any communications that might suggest they were meeting someone in the park. None of these investigative angles produced evidence of criminal activity. As summer turned to fall, the case began to fade from public attention. Local media had covered the disappearance extensively during the active search phase, but without new developments, the story gradually dropped from regular news coverage. The families continued their own informal search efforts, returning to the park on weekends to explore areas they felt might have been overlooked. They organized volunteer search parties and maintained contact with other families who had experienced similar tragedies. The first anniversary of the disappearance was marked by a memorial service held at Sacramento State University. The four students' friends and families gathered to remember Derek, Ryan, Ashley, and Nicole while maintaining hope that they might still be found alive. The service received local media coverage and temporarily renewed public interest in the case. The renewed attention generated several tips and potential leads that were investigated by law enforcement, but none proved significant. The investigation officially remained open, but practical activity had diminished significantly. The case file contained hundreds of pages of reports, interview transcripts, photographs, and evidence logs, but no conclusive explanation for what had happened to the four friends. Periodic reviews by fresh investigators yielded no new insights or approaches. The redwood forest had successfully concealed its secrets, leaving families and investigators with more questions than answers about the fate of the missing students. The second year following the disappearance of the four Sacramento State students brought a painful evolution in how their families coped with the unresolved tragedy. The initial desperate energy that had fueled private search efforts and constant communication with law enforcement gradually transformed into a more sustainable but equally determined long-term commitment to finding answers. The families had learned to navigate the complex emotions of maintaining hope while accepting the reality that each passing month made a positive outcome less likely. Derek Lawson's parents, Michael and Linda, had established a routine of visiting Humboldt Redwoods State Park once every month. They would spend entire weekends walking trails that the official search teams had covered, hoping that fresh eyes or the passage of time might reveal something previously overlooked. Michael had purchased a high-quality metal detector and methodically swept areas where he thought equipment might have been dropped or discarded. Linda carried a camera and documented every location they explored, creating a comprehensive photographic record that she hoped might eventually prove useful to investigators. The monthly pilgrimages had become both a source of comfort and anguish for the couple. The majestic beauty of the ancient forest provided a sense of connection to their missing son, but it also served as a constant reminder of the vast, intimidating environment that had swallowed Derek and his friends without leaving a trace. Linda often found herself staring up at the massive trees and wondering if her son had ever stood in the same spot, whether he had marveled at the same natural cathedral that now felt more like a tomb. Tom Murphy had taken a different approach to processing his grief and maintaining hope. He had immersed himself in studying search and rescue techniques, wilderness survival, and forest ecology. He read extensively about other missing person cases in similar environments, looking for patterns or insights that might apply to his son Ryan's disappearance. He had developed relationships with professional trackers and search specialists, occasionally funding private searches when weather conditions and his work schedule permitted. The Torres family had faced additional challenges due to language barriers and financial constraints that limited their ability to participate in ongoing search efforts. Maria and Carlos Torres had returned to their jobs out of necessity, but Ashley's disappearance had fundamentally altered their daily existence. They maintained a small shrine in their home with photographs of their daughter and lit candles every evening while praying for her safe return. They regularly contacted the sheriff's department for updates, often requiring translation assistance to understand the status of the investigation. Nicole Webb's mother, Patricia, had channeled her energy into advocacy work, connecting with other families of missing persons and working to improve search and rescue protocols in state and national parks. She had become a vocal proponent of mandatory GPS tracking devices for backcountry hikers and had testified before state legislative committees about the need for better emergency communication infrastructure in remote areas. Her advocacy work provided a constructive outlet for her grief while keeping Nicole's story in public awareness. The official investigation had entered what law enforcement termed a maintenance phase. The case remained technically active, but practical investigative activity was minimal. Detective Raymond Kowalski, who had been assigned as the lead investigator, reviewed the file quarterly and followed up on any new tips or potential leads that emerged. However, the flow of new information had slowed to a trickle, and most tips proved to be either mistaken identity reports or well-intentioned but inaccurate speculation from amateur investigators. Periodic developments would briefly reignite hope and activity. In November 2016, a hiker reported finding fabric caught on a tree branch in a remote area of the park. The fabric was collected and analyzed, but forensic examination determined it was from a synthetic material that didn't match any clothing the students were known to have been wearing. In March 2017, a park maintenance worker discovered what appeared to be a decomposed backpack in a ravine, but closer examination revealed it had been there for many years and was not connected to the missing students. Each false lead took an emotional toll on the families while also demonstrating that the case had not been forgotten. The pattern became depressingly familiar. Initial excitement and renewed hope followed by disappointment when the evidence proved unrelated to their loved ones. Yet these episodes also reinforced their determination to continue seeking answers, knowing that any one of these discoveries could potentially be the breakthrough that finally explained what had happened. The approach of the second anniversary in May 2017 brought renewed media attention to the case. A local television news team produced a comprehensive feature story that re-examined the evidence and interviewed family members about their ongoing efforts. The broadcast generated several viewer tips that were dutifully investigated by Detective Kowalski, but once again, none provided meaningful new information about the students' fate. It was during this period of renewed public attention that an unrelated group of outdoor enthusiasts was planning their own adventure in the Redwood region. James Patterson, a 35-year-old software engineer from Portland, and his longtime hiking partner, Kevin Walsh, a 38-year-old teacher, had been exploring Pacific Northwest forests for over a decade. They were experienced backcountry hikers who regularly challenged themselves with difficult terrain and multi-day excursions into remote wilderness areas. Patterson and Walsh had decided to spend a long weekend in July 2017 exploring some of the less traveled areas of Humboldt Redwoods State Park. Unlike casual visitors who stuck to established trails, they were interested in experiencing the forest ecosystem away from the crowds and developed areas. They had obtained the necessary permits for backcountry camping and had planned a route that would take them through sections of the park that were rarely visited by tourists. The two friends had developed their hiking partnership through years of shared adventures in challenging environments. Patterson brought technical skills and careful planning to their expeditions, while Walsh contributed extensive knowledge of forest ecology and wildlife behavior. They were both cautious and experienced enough to handle unexpected situations, but adventurous enough to seek out unique experiences in spectacular natural settings. Their planned route for the July weekend would take them through the same general area where the Sacramento State students had disappeared 2 years earlier, though they were unaware of this connection when they began their hike. They intended to establish a base camp in a remote valley and spend several days exploring the surrounding ridges and hidden groves that were inaccessible to day hikers. Their goal was photography and nature observation rather than any specific destination. On Saturday morning, July 15, 2017, Patterson and Walsh departed from a remote trailhead after an early start. The weather was ideal for hiking, with clear skies and moderate temperatures expected throughout the weekend. They made good progress through the challenging terrain, using GPS devices and detailed topographic maps to navigate areas where established trails were minimal or non-existent. By midday, they had reached their intended base camp location in a secluded valley surrounded by towering redwoods. After establishing their camp, the two friends decided to explore some of the nearby areas that looked promising for photography. They left their heavy overnight packs at the campsite and set out with day packs containing water, snacks, and camera equipment. Walsh was particularly interested in documenting some of the massive fallen logs that created unique microenvironments on the forest floor, while Patterson hoped to capture some dramatic shots of light filtering through the dense canopy. They had been hiking for approximately 2 hours when Walsh noticed an unusual odor in the air. Initially, he thought it might be a dead animal, which was not uncommon in the forest environment. However, as they continued walking, the smell became more pronounced and seemed to have an unusual chemical quality that didn't match typical decomposition odors. Patterson also detected the smell and agreed that it seemed strange and worth investigating. Following the scent, they made their way through dense undergrowth toward what appeared to be a slight depression in the forest floor. The area was dominated by several large redwoods and thick vegetation that created an almost cave-like environment beneath the canopy. As they approached, both men noticed that the vegetation in the immediate area seemed different from the surrounding forest, with an unusual yellowish tinge to some of the plant growth. What do you think could be causing this strange discoloration in the forest? Let us know your theories in the comments below, and stay tuned because what these hikers discovered next would change everything about the missing student's case. The source of the odor and the unusual vegetation became apparent as they pushed through a final barrier of thick ferns and emerged into a small clearing. What they found there would forever change their lives and finally provide the first real answers about what had happened to Derek, Ryan, Ashley, and Nicole 2 years earlier. In the small clearing surrounded by towering redwoods, James Patterson and Kevin Walsh encountered something that defied their combined decades of wilderness experience. The forest floor was dominated by what appeared to be a massive fungal growth unlike anything either man had ever seen in nature documentaries or field guides. The organism covered an area roughly 8 feet in diameter and rose nearly 3 feet from the ground in undulating organic shapes that seemed to pulse with an unnatural vitality. The fungal mass was a disturbing combination of colors that seemed to shift and change as they observed it from different angles. Bright orange and yellow sections contrasted sharply with areas of deep purple and black, while portions of the growth displayed an almost luminescent white that seemed to glow in the filtered forest light. The texture was equally unsettling, appearing both wet and fibrous, with tendrils and root-like extensions that spread outward into the surrounding soil. The odor that had initially drawn their attention was overwhelming in the immediate vicinity of the growth. It was a complex mixture of sweet decay, chemical sharpness, and something else that neither man could identify but that triggered an instinctive revulsion. Walsh, with his background in forest ecology, had never encountered anything similar in his extensive fieldwork. Patterson found himself fighting the urge to retreat from the clearing as his body seemed to reject the entire environment surrounding the fungal mass. As they moved closer to examine the phenomenon, Walsh noticed that the surrounding vegetation displayed signs of significant stress and alteration. Trees within a 20-foot radius showed yellowing foliage and unusual bark formations. Smaller plants and ferns appeared to be growing in twisted, unnatural configurations, as if the normal growth patterns had been disrupted by some unknown influence. The forest floor itself seemed different, with soil that appeared almost artificially enriched and unusually dark in color. Patterson began documenting the scene with his camera, though he found it difficult to capture the true scale and disturbing nature of what they were observing. Through his camera lens, he noticed details that were not immediately apparent to casual observation. The fungal growth appeared to have distinct layers and sections, suggesting it had developed over an extended period. Some areas looked newer and more active, while other sections appeared older and more established. Walsh was examining the perimeter of the growth when he made a discovery that transformed their scientific curiosity into genuine alarm. Partially embedded in the outer edges of the fungal mass, he spotted what appeared to be fragments of synthetic material. Looking closer, he realized he was seeing pieces of fabric, plastic, and what might have been metal components from manufactured items. The materials were partially dissolved or decomposed, but they were clearly artificial objects that had somehow become incorporated into the organic growth. The two friends exchanged concerned glances as the implications of this discovery began to sink in. The presence of human-made materials within the fungal growth suggested that it was not merely an unusual natural phenomenon. Something or someone had contributed non-organic materials that were now being broken down and absorbed by whatever biological processes were occurring in this location. The possibility that they were looking at the site of a serious incident began to weigh heavily on both men. Patterson continued his photographic documentation while Walsh began a more systematic examination of the visible artifacts. He could make out what appeared to be portions of a zipper, fragments of what might have been nylon fabric, and several small metal objects that could have been buckles or fasteners. The items were distributed throughout different sections of the growth, suggesting they had been incorporated gradually over time as the fungal mass expanded and developed. As Walsh worked his way around the perimeter of the growth, he made an even more disturbing discovery. In an area where the fungal mass was particularly thick and mature, he found what appeared to be organic material that was clearly not plant matter. The realization hit him with sickening clarity as he recognized the unmistakable appearance of decomposed bone material partially visible within the fungal structure. The organism was not simply growing in this location, it was actively breaking down and incorporating organic matter, including what appeared to be human remains. The discovery of what appeared to be human skeletal material transformed the situation from an interesting biological phenomenon into a potential crime scene. Patterson immediately stopped his casual photography and began documenting the scene more systematically, taking care to capture the location and distribution of the various artifacts and organic materials they had identified. Walsh retrieved his GPS device to record the exact coordinates of their location, recognizing that they would need to provide precise information to authorities. Both men backed away from the immediate area of the fungal growth, recognizing that they might be contaminating evidence or potentially exposing themselves to unknown biological hazards. They retreated to a position upwind from the mass where they could discuss their next steps without being overwhelmed by the intense odor. The excitement of their original discovery had been completely replaced by the sobering realization that they had likely stumbled upon the site of a human death. Patterson retrieved his satellite phone from his pack and began the process of contacting emergency services. The remote location made communication difficult, and it took several attempts to establish a clear connection with dispatchers. When he finally reached the appropriate authorities, he found himself struggling to explain the bizarre nature of what they had discovered. The combination of unusual fungal growth and apparent human remains was unlike anything the dispatchers had encountered in previous emergency calls. The initial response from law enforcement was skeptical, as the description of a massive fungal organism incorporating human remains sounded more like science fiction than a legitimate emergency report. However, Patterson's calm, detailed description and his willingness to provide precise GPS coordinates convinced the dispatcher to treat the call seriously. The location was noted to be within the general area where several missing person cases remained unsolved, including the highly publicized disappearance of 4 college students 2 years earlier. Detective Raymond Kowalski received the call while reviewing case files at his desk on what had been a routine Friday afternoon. The dispatcher's description of the reported discovery immediately caught his attention, not because he believed the unusual details about fungal growth, but because the location coordinates were within the search area that had been extensively covered during the Sacramento State students' investigation. Any discovery of human remains in that region had the potential to finally provide answers to one of his most frustrating unsolved cases. Kowalski immediately began coordinating a response team to investigate the reported discovery. The remote location presented logistical challenges similar to those encountered during the original search operation 2 years earlier. Accessing the site would require specialized personnel who could hike several miles through difficult terrain while carrying forensic equipment. Weather conditions were favorable, but daylight was limited, meaning the initial response would need to focus on securing the scene rather than conducting detailed analysis. The detective contacted the county coroner's office to request a forensic specialist capable of handling unusual circumstances involving decomposed remains. He also reached out to the State Park Service to obtain current maps and access information for the specific area where Patterson and Walsh had made their discovery. The coordination process took several hours, during which the 2 hikers remained at their location to guide response teams to the exact site. As the afternoon progressed, Patterson and Walsh maintained their position at a safe distance from the fungal growth while waiting for authorities to arrive. They used the time to review their photographs and notes, trying to process what they had encountered and its potential significance. Both men were experienced enough in wilderness environments to recognize that they had discovered something extraordinary, but they also understood that their discovery likely represented a human tragedy rather than a scientific breakthrough. Want to know what the forensic team discovered when they finally reached this remote location? The analysis of this strange fungal growth would reveal secrets that no one could have anticipated. So make sure you're subscribed to follow this incredible investigation to its shocking conclusion. The first responders finally reached Patterson and Walsh's location as the sun was beginning to set, having hiked for over 2 hours through challenging terrain while carrying specialized equipment. The team included Detective Kowalski, a forensic specialist from the coroner's office, a crime scene photographer, and 2 additional officers trained in evidence collection in outdoor environments. Their arrival marked the beginning of what would become one of the most unusual forensic investigations in the region's history. The initial reaction of the professional responders mirrored the shock and disbelief that Patterson and Walsh had experienced hours earlier. None of the law enforcement personnel had ever encountered anything remotely similar to the massive fungal growth that dominated the forest clearing. The forensic specialist, Dr. Amanda Foster, immediately recognized that standard crime scene protocols would need to be adapted to handle this unprecedented situation involving what appeared to be an active biological process that had incorporated human remains. Dr. Amanda Foster approached the fungal mass with a combination of professional curiosity and deep concern about the unprecedented nature of the scene before her. Her 20 years of experience in forensic pathology had exposed her to numerous unusual circumstances involving decomposed remains, but nothing had prepared her for examining human skeletal material that appeared to be actively integrated into a living biological system. The standard protocols for evidence collection and scene preservation would need to be completely reimagined for this unique situation. The forensic team established a perimeter around the clearing and began documenting the scene through photography and detailed measurements. The crime scene photographer, working under Dr. Foster's direction, captured the fungal growth from multiple angles while maintaining a respectful distance to avoid disturbing what appeared to be an active biological process. The massive organism seemed to pulse and shift subtly as they observed it, suggesting ongoing metabolic activity that was unlike anything in their collective experience. Detective Kowalski coordinated the initial assessment while fighting his own disbelief at what they were confronting. The location matched the general area where search teams had focused their efforts during the intensive search for Derek Lawson, Ryan Murphy, Ashley Torres, and Nicole Webb 2 years earlier. However, this specific clearing had not been discovered during those operations, likely due to its position in a natural depression that was concealed by dense vegetation and difficult terrain. Dr. Foster began her examination by taking soil samples from areas surrounding the fungal mass to establish baseline conditions and identify any chemical or biological anomalies that might explain the unusual growth. The soil immediately around the organism was remarkably rich and dark, with a consistency that suggested extensive decomposition activity over an extended period. The samples would need laboratory analysis to determine their exact composition and identify any human-derived materials. As the forensic team worked methodically around the perimeter of the growth, they began identifying more artifacts that had been incorporated into the fungal structure. Dr. Foster carefully documented the location and appearance of various synthetic materials, including what appeared to be fragments of backpack fabric, zipper components, and metal hardware that could have come from camping equipment. The distribution pattern suggested that multiple sources of material had been absorbed by the organism over time. The most significant discovery came when Dr. Foster identified clear evidence of human skeletal remains embedded within different sections of the fungal mass. Using specialized tools designed for delicate excavation, she was able to expose portions of what appeared to be multiple individuals without damaging the surrounding biological material. The bones showed signs of extensive decomposition and appeared to have been partially dissolved by enzymatic processes associated with the fungal growth. Working carefully through the late evening hours under portable lighting equipment, the forensic team was able to identify skeletal remains that appeared consistent with 4 separate individuals. The positioning and distribution of the bones throughout the fungal mass suggested that the decomposition and absorption process had occurred gradually over an extended period. Dr. Foster estimated that the remains had been at this location for approximately 2 years, which aligned perfectly with the timeline of the student's disappearance. The team discovered personal items that provided additional confirmation of the victims' identities. A partially dissolved student identification card bearing Ashley Torres' name and photograph was found embedded in one section of the growth. Fragments of a wallet containing credit cards and a driver's license belonging to Ryan Murphy were recovered from another area. Small personal jewelry items and clothing remnants provided further evidence that these were indeed the remains of the 4 missing Sacramento State students. Dr. Foster's preliminary examination of the skeletal material revealed no obvious signs of trauma that would suggest foul play. The bones appeared to show natural decomposition patterns consistent with death from natural causes, though the extensive degradation made definitive cause of death determination challenging. The absence of traumatic injuries supported the theory that the students had encountered some form of medical emergency or accident rather than criminal violence. The investigation team worked through the night to carefully extract and preserve as much evidence as possible while documenting the extraordinary biological phenomenon they had encountered. The fungal organism appeared to be a previously unknown species or strain that had developed the ability to break down and incorporate both organic and synthetic materials at an unprecedented rate. Samples of the fungal material were collected for extensive laboratory analysis by specialists in mycology and biochemistry. Patterson and Walsh, who had remained at the scene to assist with the investigation, provided detailed accounts of their discovery process and shared their photographic documentation with the forensic team. Their careful observation and immediate notification of authorities had preserved crucial evidence that might have been lost if the scene had been disturbed or contaminated. Detective Kowalski commended both men for their responsible handling of such an unusual and potentially dangerous situation. As dawn broke over the forest clearing, the magnitude of the discovery began to sink in for everyone involved. The 4 missing students had been found, but under circumstances that defied conventional understanding of decomposition and natural biological processes. The fungal growth represented both the answer to a 2-year mystery and the beginning of new questions about the ecological systems operating within the ancient redwood forest. The families of Derek Lawson, Ryan Murphy, Ashley Torres, and Nicole Webb were notified of the discovery early Saturday morning. The news brought a complex mixture of relief, grief, and bewilderment as they learned that their loved ones had been found but under such extraordinary circumstances. Linda Lawson later described the phone call as simultaneously answering their prayers for closure while raising new questions about what their children had experienced in their final moments. Dr. Foster's subsequent laboratory analysis revealed that the students had likely died from exposure and dehydration after becoming lost in the dense forest. The absence of traumatic injuries suggested they had survived for several days before succumbing to the harsh environmental conditions. The fungal organism had discovered their remains and begun the decomposition process that eventually led to their complete incorporation into the biological mass. This incredible discovery shows us how nature can reclaim everything given enough time, and how even the most advanced search efforts can miss crucial evidence hidden in plain sight. Hit that like button if this story has amazed you as much as it has us, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories. The mycological analysis of the fungal samples revealed a previously undocumented species that appeared to have evolved unique capabilities for breaking down complex organic and synthetic materials. Scientists theorized that the organism had adapted to the nutrient-poor environment of the deep forest by developing aggressive decomposition abilities that allowed it to extract maximum nutrition from any available organic matter. The case was officially closed with the recovery of all 4 students' remains and the determination that their deaths resulted from accidental circumstances rather than criminal activity. The families were able to hold proper funeral services and begin the difficult process of grieving and healing after 2 years of uncertainty. The discovery provided the closure they desperately needed while also offering a unique scientific finding that advanced understanding of forest ecology. The remote clearing where the students were found was designated as a research site for ongoing scientific study of the unusual fungal species. The area was restricted to prevent public access while allowing controlled research that might yield insights into natural decomposition processes and potential applications for waste management or environmental remediation. Detective Kowalski reflected on the case as one of the most unusual in his career, noting how it challenged conventional approaches to missing person investigations and highlighted the unpredictable nature of wilderness environments. The discovery emphasized the importance of persistence in unsolved cases and the value of citizen reporting in advancing investigations that had reached apparent dead ends. The story of Derek, Ryan, Ashley, and Nicole served as a sobering reminder of the potential dangers that exist even in well-managed public lands. Their families established a memorial scholarship fund at Sacramento State University to support students interested in outdoor recreation and wilderness safety education. The scholarship ensures that their memory contributes to preventing similar tragedies while encouraging others to safely explore and appreciate the natural world. The ancient redwood forest had finally revealed its secret, providing answers to a mystery that had haunted their families and the broader community for 2 long years. The extraordinary circumstances of their discovery added a unique chapter to the history of the majestic forest, reminding visitors of both its beauty and its potential dangers for those who venture too far from established paths.